Well, this is a fairly young LSU football team, and I've said several times on the podcast before that with some of these true freshmen, I wouldn't be surprised to see a little bit of a learning curve if it took them a little bit of time to get acclimated. So after week one, how are some of those true freshmen faring? Well, Brian Kelly spoke with the media on Thursday and spoke about exactly that. So we'll get into that plus so much more on today's edition of Locked on LSU.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Plus, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has got you covered this season. They've got more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. Well, we are Locked On LSU, and we are part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. I'm Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every day. I've been covering LSU football since 2016, and I now am a sports talk radio host for ESPN 1025 The Game in Nashville, Tennessee. But we've talked a lot about the Florida State game. We've recapped a lot about the Florida State game. And I think there's going to continue to be a lot of things that we continue to touch on from the Florida State game. Not just because it was week one, and not just because LSU is facing maybe a lower level opponent this week in Southern, and that's no disrespect to Southern. That's just the reality of it all. But I think we'll talk a lot about Florida State because that was the first we've seen from this LSU team from the Brian Kelly era. So we'll continue to go back to that game as a barometer for growth and also as a barometer for our expectations for this season. But I want to look forward to Southern as well, to kind of take what we've learned from that Florida State game and apply it to our expectations, not just for week two against Southern, but also moving forward throughout the rest of the season. Now, I've mentioned this a lot, specifically about Will Campbell taking over this starting left tackle spot, about how I would not be surprised if it took him a little bit of time to get acclimated. That this left tackle position is really difficult. And opposing defenses and defensive coordinators are going to point out the fact that, hey, this is a true freshman. So they probably were going to load up a lot of players on the left side just because they understand that this is a player with not a ton of experience. So they'll probably double team Will Campbell or double team some of the weakest parts on the offensive line. And that's not a knock on Will Campbell because he's a damn good player. And I think we all know that. I mean, he wasn't going to be recruited so highly out of high school if he wasn't a damn good player. If college recruiters and college coaches and college offensive coordinators didn't acknowledge the fact that he was a really good player. So I don't want this to come across as disrespect to Will Campbell. But this is just natural growth. And this is just what it takes in this, in this journey of becoming a certified, legitimate starting left tackle in the SEC. And what I think Will Campbell will develop into is eventually an NFL left tackle, an NFL offensive lineman at least. But you're going to have some growing pains and you're going to have some learning curves. And I think we saw that on Sunday night against Florida State. Not just this offensive line unit as a whole, because I think myself, probably you listening as well, if you're going to talk about on the field stuff on Sunday, if you're going to talk about the biggest problem that we saw from LSU on Sunday night against Florida State, the most glaringly obvious problem or weakness was very much so the offensive line, and Will Campbell was part of that. So Brian Kelly spoke with the media on Thursday and was asked about Will Campbell, how he's coming along, how he's been able to kind of embrace that starting role in left tackle, and what is the future for him? So this is what Brian Kelly had to say.
Will Campbell and having to play pretty much every single snap of that game, how's he sort of faring physically and mentally after a rush like that for
Yeah, so, I think we have to do a better job of maybe rotating, the tackles a little bit more and getting some more guys in the game because that's a lot, especially for a true freshman. And he battled. I mean, he was out there battling. But then you lose some of your technique and it just becomes survival. And he's a warrior. I mean, he was out there battling every play. But I think we have to do a better job as coaches in making sure that there's a bit of a rotation with the tackles.
So I think a couple things stand out there. First and foremost, the fact that Brian Kelly acknowledges how difficult it is for a true freshman, but also acknowledges that he is not going to take Will Campbell out. It's not that he wasn't able to handle the pressure. It wasn't that he isn't able skill-wise to play the position, because I think, that he is able to play it. But I think just at this level, it's really early and it's really soon in his college career to kind of take over this left tackle position. But I think it's important to note that Brian Kelly did not say that he wanted to take Will Campbell out of that position or move him into guard or move him anywhere else, take him off the starting roster, but just to do a better job of rotating. And I think that's kind of natural, right? Because Will Campbell, not only is he learning how to block against SEC caliber defensive lines, not only is he trying to learn this LSU offense and also just get acclimated to college, but also his competition just got significantly more difficult. I mean, he is now going up against guys who were just as good as he was in high school. So that takes some time, conditioning wise, to get used to. Because, I mean, he's probably, the adrenaline's pumping and he's excited in the first half. He might be able to hold his own. But if you're not used to, one, that level of competition, and two, being out there for that, just that many snaps, for that long, for that amount of time, and also the workload that was put on him, not just in being out there for essentially every single snap, but also having to hold off a really, really strong Florida State pass rush and defensive line, that gets you gassed really quickly when you're not used to it. So I think it all comes down to Will Campbell has to learn how to play 4 quarters, and Will Campbell has to continue to grow his skill, because the blocking, both in pass pro and run protection on Sunday night, wasn't good enough. And like Brian Kelly mentioned, when you get tired, when you start to, get gassed a little bit, then that technique goes out the door. And he'll learn to maintain that technique through 4 quarters. That goes through conditioning, that goes through the mental aspect of it all, the mental toughness part of it, as, I just got beat, but I'm going right back out there and I'm going to protect my quarterback. The mental aspect of, I'm exhausted, but I'm going to keep going. I think that those are all things that Will Campbell is going to have to learn, and that he will learn. It comes with time. But I think my next question is, who is going to be in that rotation at left tackle? Because that's going to be, a big question moving forward. Is it Anthony Bradford? Is he going to move over from the right side to the left? I don't know. Are you going to see Will Campbell start, and then you're going to see, Tremont Shorts go out there at left tackle? I don't know. And I don't know the answer to that. And I think that'll be interesting moving forward, is to see when Brian Kelly mentions rotation at tackle, is that a guy that we haven't seen in the starting rotation yet, or is that moving around the offensive line, trying to find that perfect balance and that perfect mixture as a unit? That's what I don't know, and that's what I think will be interesting moving forward. But the second freshman that Brian Kelly asked about was Mason Taylor. In Tuesday's episode, I talked about 3 things that I didn't like from the game and 3 things that I did like from the game. And one thing that I did like from the game was the group of pass catchers between Brian Thomas, Dre Jenkins, and Mason Taylor. Because as a pass catcher, Mason Taylor had a great game. I have his stats right in front of me. Mason Taylor, 5 of 6 for 42 yards and a touchdown. He set up that final touchdown. So Mason Taylor, as a true freshman, his very first college game, he had a good game, and he did what he was asked to do. He caught the ball. He got the ball moving. So that was good. But Brian Kelly was asked about another aspect of his game that wasn't just a weakness for Mason Taylor, but was also a weakness for this entire unit. So this is what Brian Kelly had to say about Mason Taylor and his performance against Florida State.
Coach, how did you think that Mason Taylor did in the game? It seems like he did pretty well as a pass catcher and struggled a little bit as a blocker.
Yeah, I mean, I think the realities of it are such that he's going to be able to continue to grow in the areas in which you mentioned. Look, I mean, he put on 20 pounds. He's gotten himself stronger. He's still a true freshman, so he's going to have some, growing pains there. But again, I'm excited about his progress, but there will need to be more progress in those areas, absolutely.
And I kind of apply the same logic that I use with Will Campbell that I will for Mason Taylor. I mean, Brian Kelly even mentioned it. There's going to be growing pains. There's going to be things that are highlighted in games that show, hey, this is a weakness of yours and you need to work on it. That's normal with true freshmen. they're just working through their kinks of getting acclimated to the college game, getting acclimated to this offensive system, and also just getting acclimated to college ball as a whole, because there's going to be a significant difference, in my opinion, in those players and the rest of the true freshmen, or the rest of the players that are, playing their first college snaps from week 1 to week 2 to week 10 to year 2. So I think we have to kind of understand that a lot of these true freshmen are going through growing pains, but also to the fact about the blocking. Just one quick thing that I wanted to touch on there. I don't think that Mason Taylor had a great showing on the blocking side of things. Maybe Mason Taylor is purely a pass catching tight end, and he's not necessarily a blocking tight end. You see two different types of tight ends out there. I mean, the best ones are the ones who can do it all. Look at the Gronks, guys who can, catch passes, and also they're just massive behemoths that can block on the line as well. But there was nobody on that offensive line, and tight ends included, that was blocking very well. And whenever the offensive line can't do their job, and then the blocking responsibilities fall on a true freshman tight end, that's just not fair. That's just not very fair. So I think that the pass catching ability is there, and the blocking will come not only for Mason Taylor, but for this offensive unit as a whole, as they start to make changes into personnel to make it a stronger line that can at least set up Jayden Daniels, Garrett Nussmeier, whoever's in it at quarterback for that much success. But coming up next, also got some updates on 2 wide receivers that I wanted to touch on. Some injury updates, some mental updates. Brian Kelly touched on 2 LSU pass catchers on Thursday, so we'll get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you that betonline.net is your number 1 source for all of your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. I will have a full breakdown of my picks for the weekend that'll drop shortly, so make sure to check out that. And I'll have all the odds from betonline.net. You can find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week games, and also the rest of the games for the season. So BetOnline is also your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information. They've got live betting, esports, and scores. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite sports and events. They've got MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty of the MLB season, and it's been really fun to watch some of these divisional races. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. But you can also find us on YouTube as well. So if you're somebody who's a loyal listener, whether that's on a podcast while you're working out, going for a walk, driving around, if you're just hanging out at home and you want to listen to the podcast, you can do that. You can also watch the podcast as well. We're on YouTube. So check out the Locked On LSU YouTube. Just search that in the search bar, and Locked On LSU will come up, and you just hit that subscribe button, and you'll get notified as soon as the podcast drops. So check us out on YouTube as well. But Brian Kelly spoke to the media on Thursday evening, giving an update about his thoughts from the game on Sunday, but more so taking what we learned from that game and turning it into what's going to be improved in the future. So there were 2 questions from about 2 different wide receivers in general. And one that I want to focus on first is Malik Nabers. Not necessarily as a pass catcher, because Malik Nabers had a great game as a wide receiver on Sunday. Maybe great is a little bit strong. He had a solid game. He had a strong game as a pass catcher, a wide receiver, on Sunday. But the problem was obviously the muffed punts. That Brian Kelly had so much confidence, and the rest of this coaching staff had so much confidence in Malik Nabers to name him the punt returner and kick returner, even though he'd never done it before. So as a younger guy, how is Malik Nabers faring with the just overall stress of being in a big game, which seemed like it affected him a lot on Sunday, to be completely honest with you? And how was he able to kind of move past his mistakes in special teams on Sunday? The fact that LeBron James tweeted about Malik Nabers, AJ Brown, NFL wide receiver, tweeted about Malik Nabers. Of course, all encouraging things, but on such a massive stage, how is he kind of getting past that, overcoming that? And will he be the punt returner and kick returner moving forward? This is Brian Kelly.
Done this for 3 decades. I think I've had great players that have had ups and downs, and you just show confidence in them, and by doing so they'll choose confidence. They're great players, and I think the worst thing you can do is not continue to show confidence and a belief in him. He's like everybody else. I mean, he wanted to, excel. He didn't catch punts in high school. I mean, but he wanted to do that here. And I give him great credit for wanting to do that. And so we just supported him. He had a really good week, and we expect him to, obviously, have a great game.
So not a lot of context or, not a big inside look into exactly what the future for Malik Nabers will be, or the future will be on special teams, or the future of the punt returner, kick returner position. But he does mention continuing to show confidence in players, whether it's Malik Nabers or whether that's any player that has a good game or bad, just continuing to show support and continuing to show confidence. I think that's an important thing, because when everyone else on social media is getting down on you, the last thing that you need is for a coaching staff to get down on you as well. So I think that's one important thing. It's just the support from the coaching staff. He says, I think he'll have a great game. He'll come back and have a great game. To me, that makes me think that Malik Nabers will not be the punt returner, kick returner against Southern or moving forward, unless there's some serious work that's being done in practice. You cannot win games by making mistakes like that on special teams. Florida State did not score a point on either of those punts. And that is a huge testament to that LSU defense for making those huge stops, especially. And also, okay, one of them, Florida State did it to themselves. They fumbled the ball. So I guess I don't know how much credit I can really give the LSU defense. But on that first one, very much so, yes. But you cannot make those mistakes like that, because you can't count on the fact or the hope that the other team is going to turn the ball over at the 1 yard line. If that's Alabama scores. And then that game is no longer within a one-score reach. That game is over. So you cannot make mistakes like that, even if the team doesn't score, because you never know when they will. And I have to give Malik Nabers credit, because if you're a wide receiver or any sort of skill player that can also contribute on special teams, that makes you so much more valuable, not just at the collegiate level, but moving forward in the NFL as well. I mean, if you're a fringe 53-man roster guy, let's look at wide receivers, for example. Let's say you got 12 guys in training camp on the 85, on the 90-man roster, and you are pretty at neck and neck skill level as wide receiver over another player, but you can play special teams, well, you'll get the nod because you can play special teams. So, props to Malik Nabers for wanting to kind of go beyond his pass catching and wide receiver abilities and make himself more valuable and more multidimensional, but you can't do it like that. So just based off of what Brian Kelly said about having a good game, not necessarily saying, oh, he'll get another opportunity at it, or we believe in him as a punt returner, kick returner, saying, hey, you didn't catch punts in high school, and I think he'll have a good game. I don't know. Not a ton to dissect there. I would just be very surprised if we saw Malik Nabers returning punts on Saturday. Another update is about Jack Besh, because I think a lot of LSU fans, myself included, maybe you too as well, I was wondering, why is Jack Besh not more involved in the passing game? I believe he only had one target against Florida State. And I thought, if you're going to have a wide receiver like Jack Besh, you're going to have to use him. I mean, that's how you win games, is targeting your best receivers. And Jack Besh is definitely one of LSU's best wide receivers. So why did we not see more from him against Florida State? And Brian Kelly provided a little bit of context.
Have so many receivers, I guess some games, some guys won't get involved. But what does Jack Besh need to do to maybe get a little more involved in your receiving game?
I don't know that he needs to do as much. We've been very, very careful with him. He had the stress fracture of his leg, and we didn't want to put too much on him early in camp in particular. As we begin to ramp up the season, he's going to get more and more playing time. A lot of it was just being really careful with him, so we didn't have any major setbacks.
So that makes sense. I mean, to be completely honest with you, Jack Besh getting targeted more, that I don't think that would have been the difference in the game. But it does make sense, and it provides context as to why we didn't see a ton of targets to Jack Besh, or a ton of work from Jack Besh, at least in week one. So there's stress fracture in his leg. Is that what we're calling shin splints these days? Or are we saying shin splints or stress fractures? I'm not sure, because all offseason, all we've heard of is shin splints, shin splints, shin splints. Does that sound a whole lot less menacing than stress fractures? I'm not a doctor. I'm not an orthopedic surgeon, and I don't want to be. But I do wonder, why weren't we transparent about that from the very beginning, about what his abilities were going to be? And maybe that's on me for not looking into that a little bit more of, hey, he hasn't been able to do a ton in camp. Really wasn't until that last week before the game that he was able to be out there. When Malik Nabers came out and Jack Bech was kind of filling into that slot receiver position. So maybe that's on me for not, reading between the lines there and reading the tea leaves on that one. But acknowledging that that's going on with Jack Bech and to expect more and more from him as time goes on in intervals and in little pieces, to expect more from Jack Bech. But Malik Nabers, Jack Bech, just addressing what went wrong, or just a little bit of context to what happened with them against Florida State and what we can expect moving forward. But coming up next, LSU is playing a game tomorrow. LSU is playing a game in Tiger Stadium, and I am so jealous of everybody who gets to be in Baton Rouge and in Tiger Stadium. I wish I could be there. I really do. But I'll be there in spirit. I'll be there in my heart. But coming up next, 3 ways that LSU fans can walk away from the Southern game and be happy. I want to get into that coming up next after a couple of these words. So Southern coming into Tiger Stadium for the first time ever, which is astonishing considering these two teams are playing 20 minutes apart, just a hop and a skip down I-10. But it's going to be a really fun game. The tailgating is going to be a blast. I've already seen so much hype on Twitter about the tailgates. I wish I could be there, but enjoy it for everyone who is going to be there. I'll be on my couch watching the game. But 3 ways that I think LSU fans can walk away from this game against Southern and be happy. This is what I'm going to do every week. And each week I plan on saying 3 ways that I think LSU can win the game, 3 ways I think LSU can lose this game. I don't want to undermine Southern because it's any given Saturday, every week in the SEC, every week in college football is difficult. It needs to be a win. This is going to be a win for LSU. So I have a hard time really breaking down 3 different ways that LSU could lose this game. But 3 ways that LSU fans will be happy, that LSU fans will have at least a little bit more confidence in this LSU team, and 3 ways LSU fans can maybe sleep a little bit better at night after week 1. So first and foremost, number 1, if LSU can protect the quarterback. Darian Gray, who's the host of Locked On HBCU, who is an expert in all things Southern and all things HBCU football. And he said the strongest part of the Southern team is the defensive line. I don't care if you're Southern. I don't care if you're Alabama. I don't care if you're Florida State. I don't care if you are South Harmon Institute of Technology. If the offensive line can't block, those defenders are going to get to the quarterback. They're going to put pressure on the quarterback. They're going to sack the quarterback. And it's going to pressure the quarterback, Jayden Daniels, into running, and it's going to really put a damper in the passing game. And I think we're all sick and tired of seeing that. I think we all want to see what these wide receivers can do. I think we all want to see what this passing game is capable of. So this was Brian Kelly on Thursday about how this LSU team can get past the Southern defense.
Coach, what's your thoughts on Southern defensive end Jordan Lewis? It seems like he can kind of play anywhere, linebacker and DN.
Yeah, he can play virtually anywhere. They've got, it's an aggressive style of defense. They bring pressures. And again, there were times that we didn't handle the pressures as well. So, we're going to have to prove that we can do that because they certainly have brought a lot of pressures. And they have some athletes that can run and be disruptive. So we're quite aware of that and, practiced accordingly.
So, yeah, I mean, they acknowledge the fact that this is a pretty dynamic and pretty strong Southern defense. So I think LSU fans will be happy if this offensive line can protect the quarterback just enough, so we can see part of this LSU passing game. But coming up next, the next one is I think LSU fans will be happy to see some of these mistakes cleaned up. I was really disappointed in the number of sloppy mistakes and stupid penalties that I saw against Florida State. The Ali Gay targeting call, which was so egregious, and one of the like textbook targeting call. I don't want to see that anymore. I don't want to see any of the Harold Perkins unsportsmanlike conduct. I don't want to see any more muffed punts. I don't want to see any more of these sloppy mistakes Because if you do them against Southern, you'll do them against Alabama. And that's how you lose games. So I think that I will be happy, and I think LSU fans will be happy if LSU just plays a clean game and Brian Kelly continues to deliver on exactly why he was brought into LSU, and that was to be a more organized, clean, and structured team. And that starts with no more dumb penalties, and that starts with doing your job and getting the gimmies when you can get them. Catching a punt is a gimme. You lose a gimme. And it makes it so much more difficult for yourself whenever you drop those punts or whenever you get dumb targeting calls and you lose one of your best pass rushers for the next game. So I don't want to see any more stupid mistakes. I don't want to see any more sloppy penalties. Show me that you can clean up what you did in week 1. And I think LSU fans will step away from that game. And I myself will step away happy. And the last thing, the third reason or the third thing that I think LSU fans can look at and say, okay, you know what? Good job, progress, growth. I feel better now. Is if LSU comes out playing ready and winning big, because LSU did not do that against Florida State. It was a slow and lethargic start. It was almost like this LSU team was stunned about what the expectations were of them in the middle of a game, how to keep up with Florida State. It was almost like they were just taking a nap in the first half. LSU needs to go out there and play with a sense of urgency. It's exactly what Brian Kelly said on Thursday.
Talk a lot about urgency and playing with urgency for 4 quarters. Just what does that look like to you in terms of what are the attributes you look for in a game setting of a team playing with urgency?
It's kind of what's out in the hallway is playing 4 quarters is to start fast. And so, we need to start fast. So, from a coaching standpoint, we needed to put our practice schedules together this week where, early in practice we were starting faster and, we didn't go right to individual. We went to some teamwork just to get our guys going. We have to, understand our personnel and how they play in an up-tempo situation. So, I think it's, like I said, we have to coach better, we have to play better, and then we have to look at, our start. And that sense of urgency is that every play matters. We can't wait till, the last 13 minutes of the game where we go, oh, okay, we got to turn it on. We've got to turn it on from the very beginning.
It's all about starting fast because LSU had to dig themselves out of a hole in that fourth quarter, and they were able to almost do it at least. So if I can see the up-tempo speed on offense, if I can see the sense of urgency, the hurry up, let's go, this is crunch time. If I can see that from the very first down, from the very first second of the game, I can kind of see the energy and the speed that we saw LSU play with in that final quarter against Florida State. If I start to see that trickle into the beginning of not just Southern, not just Mississippi State, but the beginning of every single game where they come out ready to play, I'll be happy. And that falls on the coaching staff as well. This is not just the players are culpable kind of thing. That also falls on the coaching staff for getting this team ready. But I need to see them come out and play fast, play with a sense of urgency, because that just makes your job so much easier later on in the game is when you do your job early on. So the 3 things that I think LSU fans can see and step away happy: protect the quarterback, clean up the mistakes, play with urgency, and win big. If you keep it close against Southern, doesn't make you feel very good about games moving forward. So I need to see a big win. I need to see this offense shine. I want to see progress from week 1. That's all I ask. It's progress. So that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day, so you can get more on the SEC by making Locked On SEC your second listen. Every day, host Chris Gordy and the local experts of Locked On take you across the SEC in 30 minutes. Make Locked On SEC your second listen. So I'll have a full breakdown of what I saw from the SEC from this past week, also my predictions for tomorrow's game, plus a full game breakdown on Monday. We'll see y'all then.